Hi, my name's Nick Hart-Williams. I'm from the Schumacher Society, which put this event together. And it came just because I've had the good luck to be living in a rural part of Somerset, but very close to the town of Frome, and very involved through my work with the city of Bristol. And so kind of was very struck by what was happening in both of them. So at some point, it seemed a good idea to really look deeper into what's been happening in what we're calling beyond party politics. So here we are. Now, many of you will know everybody on the stage, but not all. So I'll start on my left with the man you probably do all know, George, first independent mayor and first mayor. And next to George is Brenda McLennan. Brenda was a candidate in the recent elections, an independent candidate, and also coincidentally runs this wonderful place as the financial director. On my right, Pippa Goldfinger, who has just stepped down from her year as the independent mayor of Frome. And next to her is Peter McFadden, who was, along with Pippa, one of the rowdy bunch of independents that took over the council 2 years ago. And on the end is, again, somebody you'll all know, Jonathon Porritt, Forum for the Future. But Jonathan's had a pretty crucial role in the evolution of politics in this country, with being one of the co-founders of the Ecology Party. So, it's a great crew with some wonderful experiences and many, many more out here amongst you. So, perhaps you could all just grab your chairs and come and gather round. We'll have a lot of discussion. But we're going to start off with George, who will just talk to us for a few minutes, and then Peter will give us the story of Frome, and Jonathon will give us some of the history of party politics. So, George, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nick. And we're all just going to introduce ourselves by way of 3 or 4 minutes. And mine starts really by saying that 40 years ago, I was elected on Bristol City Council. I was wearing red shorts in those days. And it was as a result of being seen as being active in the community, and somebody coming and knocking on my door, a wonderful woman called Gillian Bedell, who's now dead, and who asked me if I would stand as a Liberal. And of course, you've got no chance of winning, but we ought to put somebody up. And I said, give me your manifesto, and I read it overnight, and I found it really reasonably agreed with me. So, and in those times, it was unheard of Bristol having anything other than Labour or Conservative councillors. And I thought, well, it'd be a great challenge. So I agreed to stand. 3 of us stood, all in the same ward, and we took it really seriously. We had a new approach to doing it, and we won. And about 6 months down the line, somebody pointed out I hadn't joined the Liberal Party, and I should do so. And I think I probably had a certain resistance about joining a party, but nevertheless, we were in effect independents in that we were coming from outside. We didn't have a whip. We weren't strings weren't being pulled from the centre. We had a very loose relationship with the centre because the Liberal Party in 1973 was not organised in that sort of way that the Lib Dems are now. And I have to say that I think all of us, to a certain extent, and I probably mean more than the others because they came from the Liberal Party, were absolutely shocked by the extent that people were led more by their party than they were by Bristol's own interests. And it was so evident. And it was party games being played in the chamber and in the committees. And we were kept off the committees because they felt uncomfortable that they'd got this new irritant on the city council. And so I think that was the beginning of me really not feeling happy about it. And I spent 6 years. I said I'd stand for that I would stand a second time, and it was it engaged me in politics in a way I never planned to get engaged in politics. I didn't didn't earlier on. I left very happily from the council and didn't mean to get involved in politics again. Did, in fact, when I got really angry about some of the things that Margaret Thatcher was doing, and I stood as parliamentary candidate. But in '87, I decided no more politics for me. I'll stand aside, and I took no interest in party politics at all, although I failed to resign. And I still hold some candle to the Liberals, and as they were, certainly. But when the opportunity for mayor came up, I thought that this is just inappropriate for it to be a party leader whose strings are pulled from Westminster. And that it was an opportunity to have a leadership that is totally, unquestionably, all to do with Bristol and Bristol's best interests. Now, we may interpret that in different ways, and different independents coming in will come in with different paths and different agendas. But nevertheless, to me, that was the vital thing, is that you come party dogma free, and that your only responsibility as somebody who's directly elected by the whole city is to represent those citizens, whatever their creed, colour, or politics. So that is, that's my little introduction to this, and I think that I've experienced since coming on to the council has reinforced my feeling that we must make local politics relatively free of national politics, where parties have a real purpose. And that I think that in local politics, that national politics have seeped into local politics in a way that is not constructive.
Thank you. Thank you, George. Brenda, do you want to add anything to the Bristol perspective?
Just the reason that the 7 of us stood up for independence for Bristol was exactly what George is talking about. And, on the back of George's passion for the city and his successors, and also what they were doing in Frome, a bunch of us decided to give it a go as well. So that's why we were standing.
And you'll continue to stand, presumably?
I don't know.
Okay, well, we'll now go and hear a story which probably is a little less familiar. I think it's the first time it's happened in the country, but maybe I'll be corrected on that. So Peter McFadden will introduce that story.
Fine. So Pippa and I come from Frome, which for those of you that don't know is sort of, if your maps are upright, unlike the ones in Bristol, it's sort of right and down a bit, about an hour away. It's a small market town. And so our story is from a different level of government. Frome's technically a parish, well, it's a town council, parish council. So it's at a different level. But a lot of what George has already said applies to what we've done and underpins the ethos of what we wanted to do. A group of people came together in Frome 2 years ago, 2 years and a little bit, very shortly before the last set of town elections. Brought together because of a particularly poor performance by a bunch of dinosaurs who'd run Frome for years, who were, until I got involved in this, I thought were exceptionally poor as local councillors. Now that I've got a bit more involved and we've started to talk to other people, I realise that actually they were pretty normal. And all over Britain there are small, parish town councils, many of which have had no elections for years because people are simply brought in, no one stands. It's like many good things. There was a meeting in a pub, and then there was a public meeting in a pub, which 80 people turned up to, and then that led actually to too many people standing as candidates. So we went back to the group, and then some of them selected who should stand, and we ran a pretty wacky campaign with various things which were fairly unconventional. So this is with a group of people who've never stood as councillors before. And virtually no money, and won 10 out of 17 seats. And so we control the council because the opposition are split between the 2 remaining parties, who still continue to behave as parties. At the beginning, I'll see if I can get this right, the Lib Dems hated us first and basically were absolutely against everything, and the Tories were very friendly. And then they swapped in a sort of moment, in a sort of weird sort of morph. And now the Tories vote against everything on principle, really. And so they because they regard their role as opposition. Half of Frome voted for us, but half of Frome didn't vote for us, of course. Therefore, they should be represented. Anyway, and so we've continued on that sort of role. We suspended all the committees in the first meeting, which caused a certain amount of tears, on the grounds that actually it wasn't just about the councillors. The whole system is basically. It's come from somewhere, not just in the last century, but the one before that, to be honest. You know, a lot of the systems which we're dealing with are just incredibly antiquated. They're not made for this century at all. And so a lot of the rules, the standing orders, all of the language is all just completely, it stops anybody from approaching and getting involved. So we're trying to knock down a lot of barriers, and we're doing that probably too quickly still, I think. Driven by an underlying ethos, which I got this wrong earlier, so I've written it down now. Because as a group, we have a way of working. So we are, as George was saying, we are independent. We are a bunch of independents. So we don't agree on individual issues, but we have an agreed way of working, and that's underpinned by something which a guy called Pete Hine said. If I got that right.
Piet Hine.
Piet Hine, which is the noble art of losing face will one day save the human race. So it's essentially about being able to move on, you know, and
Take that for future.
it was later said it was quoted by Hans Blix, which is kind of gives you a context for it. Hans Blix, the guy who failed to convince the world that the Iraqis didn't have weapons of mass destruction. Basically saying, well, you can see what he was saying, that, you know, if the Americans and the British had been able to go, you know what, we got this wrong, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in. But anyway, so that underpins a lot of what we believe in, I suppose, and an ethos which means if you don't manage to persuade the others of your view, then move on. So no stabbing in the back, and basically just common sense, really, and very much like George was saying, an absolute, that what leads everything is what's best for Frome. And by not being driven by any party politics from outside, it frees us up enormously. So that's where we come from. Pippa's had an extra role of having been mayor for a year last year, which gives a huge exposure to Frome that the rest of us haven't had.
Yeah, not quite as much exposure as you, Peter. I'll tell you about that later. No, just to reiterate what Peter said, I thought the town council was quite ineffectual, the previous town council. But once we became involved, I didn't realise quite how awful it was and the other people involved, which is terribly negative to say. But just to give you an idea, we're in a 3-tier system in Frome. We've got Mendip District Council above us and Somerset County Council above that. So we have to negotiate with these different levels of local government. And we decided to invite all Frome councillors, whether they were district, county or town, to a regular meeting so that we could really work together, and they're all Lib Dem or Tories at the levels above us. And we got a hilarious email back, which just cracked us up from one now deposed Tory county councillor. And he said, "I don't understand what you're proposing here, but I disagree on principle." So, I mean, we try and have rational debates. That doesn't always happen. And like Peter said, I kind of naively thought once we were elected, it would be like a board of trustees or a board of directors. We're the ones who won, all of us, Lib Dem, Tory, independents. So now we work together, but they're actually modelling themselves on Westminster, which must be one of the biggest Punch and Judy shows in the world. And it just seems a shame, they will use a lot of energy in that kind of behaviour, which they could direct more positively into some good projects. And us as independents, I think that's quite a useful term. It's kind of politically neutral. Most of us are very left-wing. There is one person who is right of centre, and most of us also are quite green. But when I was mayor, I was invited to the Royal Naval Association annual general meeting, one of these exciting things I got to do, and I was introduced to someone from an outside Frome association as being from the Frome Liberation Front. But then he said, but they're great, these independents. They've raised the council tax, but nobody minds because they're spending it on good things. And I thought, my God, this man is probably quite right-wing, but he doesn't mind a tax and spend agenda coming from an independent, because it doesn't come with a whole load of baggage that he would apply to maybe a Labour councillor. So in a way, it gives you more freedom to act quite boldly, which I think is great for local politics.
Now, Jonathon, who you all know, I think, co-founder of the Forum for the Future, who are the curators of the Big Green Week, along with the City of Bristol. And he was involved in something very, very, very important about, what was it, 15, 20 years ago?
The Green Party?
Yeah?
40 years ago.
40 years ago, my God, I was a boy.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. So yes, almost exactly the same time as George was being inveigled into the Liberals, I was tracking out my destiny with the Ecology Party, as it was then called.
Yeah.
So I agree with everything that you've just heard here about the importance of independent candidates and elected representatives at the local level. And I do think that this is a hugely important part of what the sustainability revolution is going to need, will require, is very, very large numbers of people getting themselves elected in exactly that kind of way as you've just mapped out in Frome and in Bristol, and taking all of these arguments into these archaic political systems and halls, town halls and all the rest of it, and really shaking it up and making things happen. I can't see how we're going to do what we need to do without that. But rather than just repeat all of that, I thought I might just say a word in favour of political parties. Not actually the Green Party, although I have always been a member of the Green Party. I've never been a member of any other party, so I am a 40-year-old Green Party member. My membership has been suspended on a couple of occasions, largely when I felt that the members or the candidates from other parties were actually better than the Green Party candidate, and therefore chose to support them, which is obviously not what you do in party politics.
Sin.
That's a sin, you see. So, but happily my suspension was suspended, and I thought that meant I was back in the party at that point. So I want to talk about the benefits of parties, and I want to extol the benefits of UKIP. So, I know this will be a bit peculiar. I pretty much abominate everything UKIP stands for. And certainly I abominate the style of leadership that Nigel Farage brings to it. I hate their rhetoric. I am deeply suspicious of many of the people in UKIP. I won't use the same phraseology that the Prime Minister once did, because that wouldn't be helpful. So there's nothing about UKIP that I like. Nothing. Other than the fact that it succeeded in bringing into the political domain ideas which were clearly very important to large numbers of people, which the combined inertia and obstructionism of the mainstream parties had kept out of the political domain in a completely grotesque way. And one of the reasons why we now have such a difficult, really complicated debate going on in this country about immigration is because the mainstream parties refuse to have an intelligent, sophisticated, nuanced debate about it for the best part of 15 to 20 years. So we shouldn't be surprised now that this is a very spiky, unpleasant, and often deeply intolerant debate that we have in our midst. Now, if that was your big thing in life, or getting out of Europe was your big thing in life, and you were confronted by these mainstream parties that wanted no part of that discussion, then actually being able to set up a party, or grow a party, and by dint of forcing yourself into the political system at that level, my feeling is that that's wholly good. I'm deeply envious, because obviously I would love the Green Party to be doing that more often. I do remind myself that back in 1989, the Green Party did exactly that in the European election, didn't win quite the same percentage of votes that UKIP did, but still forced many green issues onto the agenda at that time. And I think this is really important because political parties at the national level can bring life into the political domain. I wish it wasn't that party, but they can do it. And without that, we're in real trouble. Because for me, the independence at the local level works because you can see what that looks like, you can see Pippa's face, you can get a sense of Peter's shoes, you know all about George's trousers. I don't know why I'm making this sartorial, but you know, the thing is you can see these people there, you can touch them, they're flesh and blood, and you can say, oh, yeah, that's for me, or no, that's not for me. It gets harder at the national level, and much harder at the European level and the international level. And at that point, representative democracy is still something precious, something to be cherished, nurtured. And the fact that we're dealing with political parties now that are mostly as archaic and incapable of responding to global pressures today, that's our problem, not the idea of party politics. That's our problem. And in fact, George's anecdote should remind us, well, when you went into the Liberals in 1973, should remind us there was a time when political parties in this country actually had something to say. I can still vaguely remember the Liberals being quite a useful part of the political system in this country and having a lot to say about things that I cared passionately about, not least nuclear disarmament and other issues. I can probably just remember the time when the Labour Party had something useful to say. And we mustn't get caught in the moment, just today, where we're suffering from chronic dysfunctionality in our mainstream parties. We need to keep a historical sweep here. The Labour Party historically did things in this country, brought innovative, radical, critically important ideas into the political domain at the start of the 20th century, which was absolutely fundamental and has left a sort of cherished legacy, which we all now take for granted. So I can't say I'm particularly enthused by either of those two parties at the moment, but I'm not even mentioning the Tories. But nonetheless, there was a time when those parties actually had a great deal to offer. So I hope as we discuss the power of independence at the local, county level, maybe sub-regional level, let's just keep a little bit of our minds open for what we need to do to make the national political presence really work well as well.
Very good. I'm reminded, actually, also, just it's a personal experience. I ended up, when I came out of film school, making a film about the Social Democrats from the day they launched until the day they fell, as it were. And at one point, Christmas before the election, they were 40% in the polls. And then the Falklands War was called, usefully. Then election was held. And in she came again. So there we go. But there certainly was some very good energy about in that day amongst those people. Right. I think maybe my thought is I'd love to know a little bit about what difference it's made in your experience, both in Bristol and in Frome. Would anybody care to address that? Being independent?
Yeah. I think it has made a huge difference in that there is a totally different dynamic in the city council. And some councillors are still searching for a new role because, but that is about the mayoral thing more than about the independence. But the independence has meant that as mayor I can take much quicker decisions than I could if I was having to go through the party structure. And you have to, if you're in a party, go through the party structure, and you have to take some lead too from the central party as well as the local party. And so the decision making was pretty arcane and certainly indecisive and wobbly whenever it came to an election. And since we had elections every May, it wobbled every year. So they were always looking to next May. The advantage of an independent, by definition, is not on a political career course, and especially an old one. And so I think independents can be braver, and they can take decisions that are so necessary, especially in the environmental area, that are longer term that may have some short-term unpopularity, as we all know is the case when you're trying to create change, because change is judged more out of fear than out of hope or experience. And so I think there is evidence already in Bristol that, and certainly the senior officers will tell you, that they're getting decisions in a way they've never experienced before.
And Brenda, when you stood and came within 90 votes of getting in, what was it that attracted you to stand as an independent in this context?
Well, as George said, I'm not a career politician. I had no ambition to make that a career. It was just about having been involved a lot in community things and actually trying to do that from a position of a little bit of authority, tiny bit, it's local council. And it was the frustration with the parties. And I sit on Bristol City Council Audit Committee as well, so there's 2 independent members and a bunch of elected councillors on that, and it's supposed to be non-political, but even there, they start playing the party political games. So I mean, a fair bit of my reasoning was that frustration of not having the voice of the voice of the people, and it all being about party politics. So. And of course, these guys paved a way, and we thought we could probably do that. So yeah, that was my sum total of my motivation. I wasn't thinking past, do a term, try and make a difference, and see what happened.
And for you guys in Frome, what difference has it made?
Well, we actually do things. Frome was Lib Dem before, and if there wasn't a fence, they'd build one to sit on. They still do it. It's incredible. For fear of offending someone, which you are always going to do, they will do nothing. And it's so frustrating because there's so much energy in the town and creativity and risk-taking by individuals, businesses. It's a very vibrant town, and then to have this stagnant attitude because they're kind of banjaxed by it. They want everyone to love them, and that's not possible.
Yeah, so they are paralysed by fear.
Yeah, they really are.
Yeah, and constantly fighting. It's more important to. I mean, we suffer this now with the district. It's more important that we don't win. Let me see if I can get this right. Basically, it's about 2 bald men fighting over a comb. It's more important that we don't win than that they do. If that makes any sense, it's so important that we don't score any victories that they're prepared to not move anything, and that we're hitting at all the time. And I think that's what the things that we can control, we've managed to escape from some of that, and actually, as Pippa says, just do stuff, which we've done lots of. When we first got in, there was a very annoying tweet from one of the Tories who said, "Congratulations, big society." And actually, he was right. Actually, well, I say they were right. Whoever it was on the end, because actually, what we have then done is put 10 times more money into a budget for local communities. Brought in a project officer for helping local groups. Really turned the council the other way. So said, my expertise is only in getting elected. That's all I've done. It doesn't mean I know anything. The expertise is in the community. We will now, work with you and sort of try to turn it around. I think that's what we've done really is trying to turn things around. And as a result of that, we've got way more done. And I don't know, could we have done that if we were party politicians? I suspect not, because we'd have been so involved in niggling and, as George said, worrying about what's going to happen. Because now, 2 years down the line, we'd be really already thinking all the time about the next election. I don't even know if I'm going to stand, and I haven't even thought about it. It's not what's important to us.
But how does that actually work, this engagement with the community that you're talking about? Talk through an example or.
Just putting a lot more emphasis into proper consultation. I mean, so a good example might be there's a free Steiner school. Is that what you call it? A Steiner? Yeah. So a free school, which is a Steiner school, which is looking to come to Frome. And so there were all sorts, there was a growing, sort of a mixture of people who were dead against it for political reasons, people who didn't like schools, people who didn't like Stein. Anyway, sort of a growing mess of conflict, or potentially. And so we held a World Cafe type event. So where people come, I'm sure a lot of you would have done this sort of stuff, and certainly Bristol has done lots of it, But where people come and sit around a table and then they move to different tables, and so you end up, somebody who's absolutely ardently anti-Steiner suddenly finds themselves sitting with a Steiner parent who they would never talk to, you know, and then actually they go, oh, actually, that's a good point. You can do Chinese at a Steiner school. Blimey, my children wanted to do Chinese, you know, and suddenly things start breaking down. So it's about engaging with the community. Before, people just came to the council to moan, essentially, and the answer was always, no, we can't do that. It's not us anyway. It's Mendim, you know. So it was completely hopeless. And we've turned things, we spent a long time trying to get the workers and other councillors to instinctively say yes. You might have to say but later, but you know, the first time, you know, when on the phone, you have to be saying yes, because, and then trying to work out what, you know, nobody's ever asked me that before, but I'll see if I can do it. So I mean, that's what we've been working on for so long, I think. It's rather a long answer, sorry.
Yeah.
No, that's a good one.
And just to add to that, on the project front, we have a lot of voluntary organisations in Frome. I think probably a really high rate of volunteering, and some of these have very, very interesting specialisms. Like we've got a group called Friends of the River Frome who get rid of invasive weeds on the sides of the River Frome and clear it out, you know, just on a voluntary basis. And we discovered that someone had joined that group who was new to Frome, but who was a retired hydrologist from the Environment Agency. And they put together a bid to write a proposal for really making all the riverbanks, because we kind of turn our back on the river in Frome. A lot of towns do this. And they put together this great proposal, and we paid them. We paid them much less than we would if we'd gone out to a private contractor, but we used the expertise in the town, which was of a much higher calibre than our expertise, and so we do things like that, which I think are we really use the community.
Right. Well, I'm very grateful because I swim in the River Frome outside my house. So.
Downstream.
Yeah, downstream, indeed. Jonathan, any?
No, I think...
Jonathan, you're the official co-chair, now appointed.
Thank you, Nick.
You'll have more questions than me.
Do you think we should turn to the audience then?
Yes, I think so, yeah.
Hey, there you go.
Yeah, good, there's somebody up there. By the share your experience, you know, questions of course, but if you've got relevant experience like you face the same sort of issues and see things move forward, do say so. The gentleman right at the top. Sorry, Chloe. Up there.
I don't. Do I need a microphone?
You don't really know, probably, but
I don't. It's fine.
No, it's better.
it's better.
Yeah. Not for us, but people who are facing this way
True.
at the bottom.
Hi.
It's, you know,
Yes, David Taylor. I'm not actually a Bristol resident, I have to confess, but I came here because I was so excited by this panel and by the theme of the panels that are on tonight. I actually joined the Green Party back in 1974, but the strange thing, of course, is that then it was not a political party, and the independents on the panel might be interested to hear that. It was actually called itself a movement. And it was the merging of what was called the People Movement and the Movement for Survival, which was set up by Teddy Goldsmith at the time. And it only later became a political party around about 1975, which was a couple of years before Jonathon joined. And in fact, I can remember Jonathon coming to his first conference, because I think I even nominated you, Jonathon, onto the National Executive. You've probably forgotten. But
There's a
and one of my great achievements, so I'm very pleased to have done that. But the thing that strikes me most when I think back over those last 40 years and of pursuing green politics is essentially that the major issues that we're facing have not been tackled.
absolutely.
The green movement has failed, and the green politics has failed in its historic mission over the last 40 years. We're facing runaway climate change, a mass extinction crisis, and a whole list of catastrophic problems, which I'm sure you're all more than familiar with. And we are still failing. And I think at the nub of it, you've got, although you have agreement on a phenomenal range of policies and ideas and good things to do in our local communities, what we don't have is a unified political strategy for that wider green political movement. You've got some people who join and pursue the Green Party. You've got some people who join other political parties and pursue green politics through them. You've got people who stand as independents. You've got people who want to join pressure groups and NGOs. You've got people involved in internet activity with NVDA, with businesses. There's a whole range of different strategies, and all of them have huge flaws. And what we have not got is an overarching strategy for the wider green movement that can actually give us leverage and enable green politics to be expressed in relation and proportion to its real strength on the ground. And if I could put that as a question to the panel, is what would they do to really make the green movement, the wider green movement, politically effective?
Very good. Who would like to answer that?
Could I?
Yeah?
Just an initial response is I don't feel qualified to give you a strategy or a method for getting to one. But what I would say is don't let that hold you up. You know, just try doing things in all different ways all the time, because sometimes when we're blocked by Mendip, they use the word strategy. That's not in our strategy, you know. And sometimes a strategy is almost, it's a blocker, not a facilitator. So I would say maybe, sorry? If it's not any good, it is what?
A blocker.
Yeah. Or it just takes so long to get there and it's impossible to have the consensus nationally or globally. I don't know, that's what I feel.
Is there a sense in which, as independents, you're more likely to be able to get to grips with some of the big environmental issues?
I think so. I think part of the danger is maybe sometimes we've just been too serious about it. And to engage with the general population, we've got to be more upbeat and make it more to do with improvements today rather than it ought to be improvements about, you know, for our children. I think we've just got to stop preaching about it and make people see the difference really quickly, because it just doesn't seem to wash. Because I know I've done it myself, and then you end up, you're almost, you're sermonizing with your politics, and people switch off. And so one or two people in here have heard it before, but when I made great sense, and our team made a great sense when we were making a presentation to the European jury for Green Capital, which we won a week and 10 minutes ago. And that we would involve the community through a sense of fun. And when it was announced a week and 10 minutes ago, the European Commissioner said, and it goes to the city with a sense of fun, and I knew then we'd won it. And so I think that has been a problem. We are all probably responsible for that. Immediate results need to be seen.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think definitely, and I agree with Pippa, that we can spend far too long thinking about it. We've used ready, fire, aim as a motto. I think at a certain point, it's that sort of 80% thing. At a certain point, when you know it's right, you need to just do it. And there's all sorts of things which we are now doing in Frome where we're going, okay, there's a risk, because one of the other things that you're allowed to do if you're an independent is make mistakes. You know, and it goes back to that U-turning thing, because you can say, all right, we thought this was right, we were pretty sure it was, but it wasn't, and so now we're going to change it. Because if you're not hidebound by a political dogma and an ideology and rules from above and all that sort of crap, you can actually do things, you can be much braver. And I think that's what we need. And what you were talking about, of all these different parties who've tried to do things, they've spent too long thinking about it and not enough doing it, and just need to, at a certain point, we know enough, and that's when we need to just do it. And indeed, have lots of fun doing it. because that's what will engage people. Sermonising is well, we know this so well. The whole putting across of a climate change message has been a complete disaster in so many ways over the last couple of decades, and part of that's got to be about preaching to people. People don't want to know, do they? No. That's what I would say.
So if I can add one thought on that, I was fascinated at a quote from Rex Tillerson, the chief executive of ExxonMobil, the other day, who said, what is the point of protecting the environment if you're going to damage the interests of humankind? And I'd sort of... It's quite interesting. But the answer to the question is to think about it from the perspective of the Daily Mail.
Yeah, you've done UKIP, now you're doing the Daily Mail.
Yeah.
Jonathan.
Yeah, no, you've got to open out.
Yeah.
So if you are writing this from the perspective of the editor of the Daily Mail, that person will say three things about the environment movement. First, that it is focused far more on stopping people doing things rather than enabling them to do things. Historically, that is probably true, and thank God the Green Movement did successfully stop a lot of people doing things, because without that we'd be even worse off than we are now. But historically there is some truth in that. So the movement as a whole is seen more as naysayers, not as yay-sayers. And I think what's really interesting about what you've heard here is that the success of what's going on in Bristol and Frome is essentially on the saying yes to things, not the saying no to things. And this is a very important part of the dynamics. Secondly, the editor of the Daily Mail would almost certainly say that the Green Movement is focused more on the future than it is on the present. So although I know lots of people love this, the good old adage, we must do this in the interests of our children and our grandchildren, tends to get right up the noses of people who think it would be quite useful if someone was going to do something in their interests, right now, today. Mm-hmm. So we've had a future-oriented perspective, quite properly, because without Absolutely. It we'd be in difficulties, but it means that sometimes it's seen as we're pitching this out into the future, not sufficiently focused on what's happening in people's lives today. And thirdly, although this is rich coming from the editor of the Daily Mail, they would probably say that green is all about trees and butterflies and birds and all the rest of that nice to have stuff. If the rest of the world is working well and your personal economy is going well and you've managed to get people's life standards improved and so on, then you can worry about the environment. And there is something about that critique of environmentalism which is fair. I don't think the Green Movement as a whole has focused enough on prosperity, on jobs, on skills, on opportunity, on dealing with people's real issues in degraded communities. And I'm not talking now about the Green Party, because obviously I take a huge amount of pride in the fact the Green Party has not fallen into that trap, but the Green Movement as a whole has been reluctant to embrace that broader equity perspective on people's needs. So it's only too easy to explain why the environment movement has failed from the perspective of the editor of the Daily Mail. The real question is, what would we then do about it? And if we undid those three negative characterizations of the Green Movement today, we might be making quite an impressive start.
Can I just say on my little micro level, what I was finding when I was campaigning was that, because I obviously have quite a few green credentials, I won't go into that, but, and I got accused about greening the Greens on that micro level, and in my ward, a lot of I picked up quite a few of the votes from the Greens because I think it's about leading by example, and because I could say, well, I've done this and I've done that, and I put my money where my mouth is in terms of greening. So I think that was a contributing factor as well. So.
Right, up there, is that Darren?
Yes.
Darren.
I was just looking around the room and also at the panel, and I'm noticing that it's a very white, dare I say, middle-class audience and panel, and I was wondering if you'd like to comment on how we might broaden this into some other areas.
Well, I've just come from the Afro-Caribbean Chamber of Commerce, which has 300 members in Bristol. And it was a meeting about general matters of interest to BME and their various communities. They embraced immediately my plea that they get really deeply involved in European Green Capital. And that is really valuable to me. So I actually think if we approach it in the right way, because they see it as business interest, and if we approach it in the right way, I think that we can, and I'm absolutely determined that we do, that we use the environment, we use the green capital tag to involve all the communities in Bristol. And I think we should start there. We should start with the schools, because in the schools, whatever race, creed, colour, background people may be, children may be, they're open to new ideas. They don't drive cars. And they, moreover, they will spread the word amongst their own communities, amongst their own parents. So I'm really optimistic that in Bristol we can do it, and it's really nice that I happen to have just come an hour ago from that very meeting where I got such a positive response.
George, could you just extend that a bit and explain to us what green capital will enable or demand of us?
Well, that's a big question. I don't want to hog the time. I think that it's the main purpose for green capital. After all, we are incredibly fortunate in that we had a really energetic team led by Darren and others, and Martin wearing his green tie, but we don't all have to wear green ties. So we're incredibly fortunate that we had a really energetic team. We have moved a long way in the last 3 or 4 years, but I think what it means to Bristol is it sets the challenge for us to come up to the sort of level of Stockholm and Copenhagen and Hamburg and others who go before us. So it is a huge challenge, but of course it's also a platform that Bristol can sell itself as an exemplar to other cities. So I have the energy portfolio amongst the 8 core cities in England, which are the biggest cities outside London. I want to make quite sure we share green capital right across all the other cities so that we can all, and I'll learn from them as well. So I think it gives us a huge incentive to up our game.
Nick, if I can just come back to the question on this issue. I think ever since I can remember my early meetings, the environment movement, green movement, has been beating itself up about being middle class for the last 40 years. It is an absolutely ritual bit of self-flagellation, and thanks for giving us another and I'm sure we're all feeling much better. But don't do it. Almost every revolution in the world has started with the middle classes. And almost every revolution to come will probably start with the middle classes. So I know we all go through this absolutely appropriate political correctness, but it's probably not necessary. And sometimes you need to ask why we're worrying about it. So I'm very interested in the Beppe Grillo movement in Italy. And if you look at the percentage of the candidates, the Grillini, who got elected into the Italian parliament, 82% of them would count as middle class. That's the way the world is when it comes to political activism at that level. I'm not saying that's either a good thing or a bad thing, I'm just saying it's sort of reality. A harder question is why there has been relatively little, in fact in many parts of the UK, no representation of BME communities on green issues. And I think that goes back to the earlier issue about the difficulty we have articulating why green politics actually matters to every single community in the community, wherever they might come from, and finding a way of making that really striking and really important for those groups. So I think that's a much more telling and much more difficult one for us to answer, and absolutely critical to what happens in Bristol. Absolutely critical. And in London and many other big cities. So I'm not too worried about the middle class bit, but I am very concerned that the changes around BME communities don't look very convincing over the last, 40 years.
Can I come back on that as well? It's a bit different for us in Frome, which is pretty white. It's rural Somerset, and there are a few black people, and I know all of them. It's both of them. But the middle class thing, I think one should be aware of it, and what you can. And not all the IF councillors are middle class, and you could say the same of any of the political parties as well. But what you need to do is think about the environment you're in, and I don't mean the environment outside, I mean the environment inside. That, what venues do you choose? And we're such a teeny-weeny town council that most of our meetings can't be held in the town council offices. They're too small, and we want to encourage more and more people to come to the meetings. So we hold the meetings all over Frome, and that makes a big. If you're in a small town, the public transport's not great. So people who don't have cars, we're trying to do it so that people can get to those, at least some of those meetings. They're in schools, community halls, a further education college. We had one in the old people's home the other day. So we're trying to kind of get out there so people don't feel intimidated by the venue. And I think that's really important. And we had this weird anomaly recently called the annual town meeting, which is actually a meeting for the people of Frome, hosted by the council, but it's not a council meeting. We don't vote on anything. And we organised the WI to do the food. We made sure that we all gave really short speeches, and there was music. And what we wanted was people to bring their kids along, because those people are excluded from council meetings, which are 7 o'clock in the evening and bedtime if you've got little kids. So just by doing things like that, we had the highest ever turnout. And just making it more accessible. Not everyone will want to be a councillor, but if they feel that they can have a connection to their councillors, I think that's really important.
Could you come and organise our council meetings, please?
If you pay me.
Parents to fear these creatures, but once they're introduced to them, they love it. Frogs, tadpoles, you name it, that's where to start. In every school, go out into the gardens, show them. And that's where your green energy comes from. And they not only then grow up to not fear small creepy crawlies and to be interested in green things and to love them, but sometimes they also get their parents along to events because they say, there's a nature fair, let's go and see, because they've learnt at school how interesting these things are. So I think we really, really have to target the children. And then they often bring in parents and even grandparents, and it's a great way of, making a lifelong interest and commitment.
Very good.
Can I just give a quick example that I've put a fund aside to enable the year 6, the top year in every single primary school in Bristol, to plant a tree, and with the Woodland Trust providing educational material, make sure that that tree is at the heart of a whole environmental story, and that eventually everybody in Bristol will have planted a tree. Yeah, and I know that's the soft green side, but I think that they then have some ownership about it, and they understand that doubling the canopy across Bristol actually does make a real difference, and they then take it home and they teach their parents. But around that tree must be a bigger environmental story. So we are going to do it. You heard it here.
Great.
Peter.
No, I've just written down George's idea because, we're pinching each other's idea. We've got
Nicking ideas is really important.
We've got 20,000 quid in the budget for a community tree planting scheme this year. So why shouldn't that be the children? A child we could, that would add up probably, so that there is a child linked to each of those trees.
Yeah. Well, proportionally, that's more than the 200,000 I put into my budget.
The other thing that I'd say to you, you're one of the youngest people in this room, and that's the other thing that we face, and we definitely face in Frome. And actually, the average age of councillors has gone up 5 years between the last 2 elections in Britain. I looked at a statistic this morning. The average age is 65. It was 55.
The average age
65. It was 60. So it's gone up from 60 to 65. So there's a real issue in there. And I think, going back to the earlier point, of Jonathan's, we shouldn't beat ourselves up about it, but once we've got into power, then we can do something about it. So we've just elected one of the youngest mayors in Britain. We've also got so he's 22. He's also one of the tallest mayors in Britain. But that's
As opposed to the oldest and shortest.
This man is 6'5" in Frome.
So now you completely lost me now. So he's very young. And then the youth also elected a mayor representing young people and a deputy young mayor. And we put far more money into the budget than ever before, which they're controlling. So and then we're doing a lot with younger people to try and boost that side, to try and get people engaged. And also we've got a growing number of people who are coming back to Frome. There's no university, there's no further education beyond. So more and more people have gone, they've done university, at the end of university you get a job, don't you? Oh dear. And so there's a growing number of well-educated youngsters, 22, 23, coming back into Frome, who are trying to really engage and bring into, not politics, but active engagement within the community through internships, through apprenticeships, through that kind of thing. Because I think there's that is a growing group of people within the country who are going to go one way or the other. They're either going to hit the streets or they're going to get engaged properly. And I think there's a real issue, for us, youth is, to be honest, a much bigger, as Pippa says, is a much bigger issue than ethnic minorities, but it's a big issue. And I think once you're in power, then you can really try and do something about it.
Yes, the gentleman over here on the second row.
So this is really beguiling, and it's wonderful to hear. I think I might move to Frome. I mean, it's it's a good advert. But George is in his first term as an independent. You're in your first 2 years as independents. So what's going to stop this just being a blip, and then next time the empire will fight back, it'll all get back to normal? What's different now? Because it sounds like it should just snowball. People will be going, this is fantastic, we want more independence. But somehow there's a part of me that thinks it won't be quite like that. So how do we make this grow?
Yeah, and somebody's pointed out to us you can't be a virgin twice.
And you might add to that the Green Party, which of course has Brighton as its first council, or serious council of that size, and there is a question mark about what is happening to the Green Party as the largest party on Brighton Council, because again, that seems to be going badly wrong at this stage. So it is quite an interesting question about how do you make these things not permanent, because nothing's ever permanent in the world of politics, but how do you give them durability so that there is something that sticks across these big electoral moments?
So I'll just say one more thing, which is that what's emerged in Frome in the last couple of months is a group who are calling themselves IFNet. So they've essentially emerged.
People trying to leave by the
So,
way.
Oh yes.
So they are a group of people in Frome who've recognised that we as a group might not stand, that actually there needs to be a movement behind the desire to have people, for this to be repeated. And so now we have a quite interesting situation, because it's kind of, so who are they answering to? Are they us? Are they not us? So, so there's a little bit of working through. I mean, obviously, many of them they are effectively friends of us, but not necessarily our personal friends, So that's what's happened for us, which is quite an interesting dynamic, and I'm not quite sure how that'll play out, but it's a sort of, it came as a sort of horror as people like me said, I don't know, will I stand again? Because why should I? I've done my 4 years. As far as I'm concerned, this is like being a governor of a school. I've got no political aspirations. It's something I'm happy to do for the town for a while. And so that's what's happened in Frome. And I can't believe independents wouldn't be re-elected, but the dinosaurs are definitely not dead.
Yeah.
No.
They are only, we really saw that in the county elections, which we've just had, where each party put up the worst candidates I have ever seen. And they were absolutely, across the board, terrible. We didn't stand because we don't do county, we're doing Frome, But it's quite clear that they will come back with the same sort of appalling rhetoric, And so, we'd have 3 county-level Lib Dems who were elected by about 8% of the vote. So effectively 92% of the population didn't vote for them, So they haven't gone. So you're right, that threat is definitely there in Frome.
We just to follow on from that, I saw someone posted something on Facebook, and they said rather disappointedly, well, we would have voted if someone had stood in our ward. And I felt like saying, you could have stood as an if candidate. You know, that's what's not happened, and we're a bit disappointed by that. We kind of want people to say, hey, you know what, we're going to do IFS. That probably is some dodgy acronym, but you know, and that didn't happen. And what happens is you do end up with people kind of relying on you to be the councillor. You're doing that. That's great. We don't have to worry about it. But we think we're going to have to kind of get people to understand that they're part of this, and they have to step up a bit.
And Independence for Bristol is obviously continuing its work. We've got Jason up there, got elected out of our 8 that stood, but we're going to continue to do a lot of work, and hopefully have more candidates standing in all the future elections. So.
And you did a lot better than UKIP.
Yeah.
You know, Bristol is relatively UKIP free. Sorry about that, Jonathan.
Doesn't worry me, as you heard. Doesn't worry me.
You know, obviously that was our first year, so we learned a lot, and obviously we're going to continue on as well. So,
the woman on the 5th row, please, with the microphone. 5th row. Oh, you've got it. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. I did a bit of leafleting for the Independence for Bristol, and on the doorstep, lots of people were asking what their manifesto was and what policies they had. And obviously that wasn't the point, so I had a lot of discussions about the fact that that wasn't the point. But they were very confused, and I wondered what the Frome councillors could offer in terms of advice for the next time round. We've got one candidate in now, but I think Bristol really needs a lot of education in terms of what an independent councillor actually is and what they stand for, and how we can actually up the game next time and get more of you in. Or us in, I should say.
yes.
Oh, you do.
Okay. I mean, you're absolutely right. We met that problem or that challenge very often. So what do you stand for? You know, what's your manifesto? We haven't got one, have we? Because we won't take. We're not going to even discuss an issue until we need to discuss it, and then we will know what we think about it, along with everybody else. So you're right. There is a real challenge of educating people that it's a different way of doing things. It is a different paradigm, and you're not being governed from somewhere else. So I think one has to keep pushing that message. We caved in actually a little bit, and we looked at, so what are the bigger issues, and we used external facilitation a lot in all our meetings, and we used a facilitation process to.
This is when you were standing.
Yes, so when we were standing, to sort of pick out some of the big issues for Frome which we could clearly see we did have a common view on, or were likely to put forward. And so we then said, okay, so these are the broad areas that we know we're going to push. But that was, we kind of did that because we kept meeting exactly that challenge. So it sort of partly did that, but because we didn't want to spend all our time discussing issues that we didn't know. It is a leap in faith.
But to be fair, the parties who had manifestos achieved absolutely nothing that went before us. So,
I mean, I'm very uncomfortable about that, I must admit, because it sounds really open and inclusive, and let's work this out as we go along. I mean, just imagine what would happen if that was abused by a bunch of people who aren't as obviously utterly brilliant as you are, and who actually kept the whole thing open, and then when they were elected revealed exactly what they stood for and manipulated the process. That's not so bad. And then manipulated the process. So I am nervous about that, because I think you have to put at least a minimum of what it is that you stand for. If nothing else, what your high-level principles are, your values, and the absolutely critical things that you want to achieve were you to be elected as a councillor. I would insist on that before I put a vote in any person's box, to be honest.
I don't think those two automatically oppose each other. But as somebody said from the audience, I mean, you could choose to vote Lib Dem because, for instance, they're not going to put up the fees for university students. They promised, they signed a manifesto saying they wouldn't.
Yeah, but they're going to get punished. They're going to get punished for that, and so there is an accountability in that story.
But
George.
now I chose to issue what I called a vision rather than a manifesto, and I was criticised a lot, especially by my competitors, the other mayoral candidates, for not having a manifesto. But it was marginal argument. A vision described the sort of Bristol that I stood for. But it didn't count the number of houses I was going to build. You know, what I think is dangerous about manifestos is that they paint you into a corner and they don't give you enough flexibility. So I think describing enough for people to understand where you're coming from and trying to get to is absolutely right. But a manifesto that just ticks all the boxes is not that helpful.
Yeah, and we did give that level of information and what our personal views were, and the reason why we as individuals stood. And they were a variety of reasons. So what we felt was that people weren't just getting a singular perspective. You know, my, it's not called it's a ward. I stood with, there's 3 seats at town council level. I stood with a builder called Dave Anderson and a guy who works for Wiltshire County Council called Toby Elliott. We've all got quite different backgrounds, and although we're all pretty lefty, we had different things that were of particular importance to us. Toby knows a lot about further education. Dave is very passionate about social justice. I was really into inclusivity, and so, you know, in our profiles, that would tell you what kind of people we were, as well as a kind of vision that we were putting forward, but not a manifesto.
Gentleman in the front row has been waiting for a while, and then gentleman in the green tie.
Now, I would like to share something which comes from being in North Somerset now. I don't know how many people here actually live in North Somerset. Can I have hands up for the number of people here who live in North Somerset? And
6.
6.
Including you.
Including me. And I would imagine that all 5 know, like me, that North Somerset is led, and has been since 2007, and they got re-elected in 2011, which reduced me to tears. And North Somerset is led by 6 village idiots who call themselves Conservative councillors, and they keep going on about what a wonderful council they have, and we know that they are village idiots, and that's because they included amongst their numbers Peter Bryant, the only one who lives in Weston-super-Mare, who had a bumper sticker on his car saying, everybody in Weston-super-Mare is an idiot. And so why did they choose him to be one of the 6? It must be because they're like him, they're village idiots. And what they do is like some other councils, and people in here might be able to quote another council because of relations or friends who have told them that they meet in secret to make decisions. And amongst the things that they've done, so far they've had to save £45 million, and they've done that in secret. And they've got another 45 million, I've been told, that they've got to be saving. They've signed various large contracts, one for 9 million and 2 for 15 million, all in secret.
What do you think can be done?
What do you think can be done? I've been given a vision of having independent councillors in charge from 2015. And the way it works is that we've got the village idiots who call themselves a wonderful Conservative council, have played right into our hands by doing everything in secret. And so a large part of my vision is actually talking about the fact that they do everything in secret, and that when the independents get elected, and I don't mean if they get elected, I mean when they get elected, is that everything will be out in the open.
If you want some inspiration, turn to Liscard.
I have got some inspiration already
Great.
from what's been happening this week, you see, because I've been along to various meetings. Like on Wednesday, I went to a meeting to do with housing, and I realised that what you have to be doing is when you're talking about housing, which is one of the major issues that people talk about, the desperate need for affordable homes.
Absolutely.
Who do you look to? You look to your local housing association, and in North Somerset, and Lions Homes will be a big part of the campaign, and they will really enjoy doing it because they've been involved in community projects, and they're actually involved in a new community project which I'm involved in, which is the Big Well lottery project, where we've been given for part of Whirl £1 million to spend over 10 years, and we've just started the process, actually on Monday of this week, of training to be community volunteers.
Okay, can I give an answer to the...
Yes.
I think the gist of your question really is, does independence result in more open government? Because you're talking about the sort of government, you're absolutely right, that when it's vested in a single party, which effectively it is in North Somerset, in that I think that there's majority party leadership in North Somerset. I don't want to be personal about North Somerset because they're my partners in running the West of England Partnership. But I think in general, parties do result in much more secretive policy making, and as independents, we've got to be open. I have to share everything immediately with the citizens, with the wider population, because I don't have anybody else to share it with, or at least I have to share it with all the other parties as well. So I think it does lead to much more open government, much more.
We're getting towards the end because there are some mayoral duties that have to be carried out. I won't say who by. So, Martin, the last question.
Thanks very much. It's great hearing all the ideas, but small parties and independent organisations, even independent mayors, are not paid much attention to until they raise their heads above the parapet and start saying things and doing things. And then the whole party political machines from all sides come in and bear fire on them. How on earth are you going to survive and respond to those large organisations with lots of clout, lots of money and lots of influence, and be sustainable?
That's a wonderful concluding question. Perhaps we should go down the table with that one, George.
I think you just have to appeal to people's instincts, and I think the good British instinct is to support the underdog, to support in the courts. If you defend yourself in the courts, you often get greater sympathy than if you are defended by a very expensive barrister. And I think it's appealing to that instinct by the voter to support the people with the smaller resource rather than support the big party organisation. That's what one has to hope for. And as a final thing, because I am going to go, because I'm meant to be giving another talk at 8 o'clock, is I don't want to go without knowing the story about Peter's exposure.
Brendan.
We have to be quick again.
I'd just say that Independence for Bristol is going to keep trying to gain momentum. We've got a lot of work to do. It's getting candidates to stick their heads above the parapet is obviously quite a big challenge, and we've learned a lot. This year was our first attempt, given that we only started in January for the May election. So I think we gained a lot of momentum, and we're going to continue to do that. So watch this space, and if anyone wants to run for Independence for Bristol in May next year in their ward, contact us. The website's up. So
I think it'll just happen. I don't think you need to worry. I think there will be sufficient examples. I'm busy writing up Frome's example as a recipe book, incidentally, as the things we've done right and the things we've done wrong, and also other councils who we've started to get this to. I think it'll happen, and also I'm deeply worried by the alternative, which isn't it's not exactly what's going on, but lurking in the background for me is Turkey and then Brazil, and I think the current system is fundamentally dysfunctional. And that people will not put up with that for much longer. As they see it being increasingly dysfunctional, and they also see alternatives, it'll happen.
I mean, we're just a parish council, so I don't think at any kind of national level the political parties will be interested in us, except for they're interested in our successes, because what they want is to have a little bit of that to rub off on them. And the leader of our council has been invited to the House of Parliament to talk to a committee about localism, because what we're doing, we're actually doing it. And so because they kind of promoted it so much at the beginning of their term of office, they can't then really slap us down for taking up the reins and doing it. So that they want to kind of be associated with it if they think it's popular or successful. And shall I quickly tell you about... Okay, desperately holding on to my dignity but failing. I was persuaded when I was mayor we have a carnival in September. It's a big West Country tradition. And the ex-mayor, who are very... the previous ex-mayor to me, who's a very kind of ebullient, cross-dressing... old-style Frome, persuaded me, and he's a real performer, persuaded me to sit on a throne in the back of an electric pickup truck in my regalia, being fanned by him and another councillor who were naked, painted gold, and luckily wearing loincloths. So that was Peter's, and then we were paraded through the whole town, and they were fanning me with palm leaves. It was my finest hour. But the best bit, and anyone who was down outside Colston Hall heard me tell the story, was that as we were driving along, I heard a little girl say to her granny, "Granny, is that the Queen?"
Jason, you've got a job. Get that gold paint.
So, Martin, I bet you didn't expect that answer as a way of making this whole thing sustainable. But I think it's this, you've asked the right question, because let's be honest, we've had peaks of interest in many of these things over many, many years, and they often die away again. There's no guarantee they'll be durable and sustainable. You're absolutely right. People's capacity for inertia seems almost limitless, so we just know that's the truth. Don't worry, George, I'm used to you walking out when I'm in mid-sentence. So no offense taken, I can assure you. So I think that is the right question, and I guess the story I would say is this is really hard graft. What's going on here is really hard graft, and I think we should recognize that this eventually materializes as people elected onto a council. But before that, this is just unremitting, backbreaking activist work, street by street, house by house, contact by contact, night after night, not when the sun's shining, but when it's not shining. And there is no substitute for that hard graft. And actually this evening, the second meeting this evening, I'm sure Nick will say something about that in a moment, we'll look at all of this. Because the one thing I might say about making this more durable is, why is it that the NGOs, our big NGOs, have traditionally looked down their noses at the business of getting people elected into positions of influence, responsibility, and even power? And I know that will sound unfair to some people, because you'll know NGO activists who also do the hard graft on the political front, but there are many tens, hundreds of thousands of people who pay their dues to wonderful NGOs and then do sod all about the democratic entitlement that comes with it. Democracy is a precious thing. If you look at the collective contribution of the millions and millions of people who belong to NGOs here in the UK, if you look at their collective contribution to maintaining the heart of our democracy, it's pretty small. So I suspect one of the ways in which we would be able to build more durability is to say, right, it's not enough to pay your dues to an NGO. You have to start thinking about what the responsibility is now to maintain this flaring of independent, democratic commitment and play your part in ensuring that it is durable.
Lovely, thank you.